For this Good Friday service, our first scripture, we turn to John's Gospel, as we will do throughout this service. John chapter 19, and we start to read at verse 1. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they struck him in the face. Once more Pilate came out, and he said to the Jews, "Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him." When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, "Crucify! Crucify!" But Pilate answered, "You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him." The Jews insisted, "We have a law, and according to that law he must die because he claimed to be the Son of God." When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid and went back inside the palace. "Where do you come from?" he asked Jesus. But Jesus gave him no answer. "Do you refuse to speak to me?" Pilate said. "Don't you realize I have power to either free you or to crucify you?" Jesus answered him, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the Jews kept shouting, "If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be king opposes Caesar." When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judge's seat at a place known as the Stone Pavement, which in Aramaic is Gabbatha. It was the day of preparation of Passover week, about the 6th hour. "Here is your king," Pilate said to the Jews. But they shouted, "Take him away! Take him away! Crucify him!" "Shall I crucify your king?" Pilate asked. "We have no king but Caesar," the chief priests answered. So finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. As we look at the whole story of this trial of Jesus, the question that has really struck me this year, as I've read through the narrative again and again, is actually who had the power in this situation? Who was the one who seemed to be in charge? Who was the one who had authority here? Was it Pilate? It was certainly his claim. Verse 10 of the verses we've just read, he said to Jesus, "Don't you realize I have the power to release you or to crucify you?" So was it Pilate that had the power in this instance? Or was it the crowd? They were certainly influential in the whole thing. They kept shouting at every time Pilate asked them, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate kept seeking their opinion. And in verse 12, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but they kept shouting, "Crucify! Crucify!" So did the crowd have the power in that situation? I think in reality, if we're looking to see who had the power, who was in control, who was in charge, it was Jesus. Despite the fact that he was in a weakened state, despite the fact that he had been flogged, despite the fact that he was being abused, he remained in control. By his silence and his controlled answers, he managed the situation. Verse 11, Jesus actually says to Pilate, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above." And in that moment, Jesus claimed all the power. We continue with a second reading from John's Gospel. We continue where we left off, John chapter 19, second part of verse 16. So the soldiers took charge of Jesus. Carrying his own cross, he went out to the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. Here they crucified him and two others, one on each side, and Jesus in the middle. Pilate had a notice prepared and fastened to the cross. It read, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." Many of the Jews read this sign, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and the sign was written in Aramaic and in Latin and Greek. The chief priests of the Jews protested to Pilate, "Do not write the King of the Jews, but that this man claimed to be King of the Jews." But Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." When the soldiers crucified Jesus, they took his clothes, dividing them into 4 shares, one for each of them, with the undergarment remaining. This garment was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. "Let's not tear it," they said to one another. "Let's decide by lot who would get it." And this happened that the scripture might be fulfilled, which said, "They divided my garments among them, casting lots for my clothing." So this is what the soldiers did. Near the cross, the mother of Jesus stood with his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, "Dear woman, here is your son." And to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And from that time on, this disciple took her into his home. We spoke previously about Jesus claiming the power from Pilate and from the crowd in the situation of his trial. And as we look at this particular passage of Scripture, we realize that this is where we truly see a demonstration of that power. This is where the plan was being fulfilled. Often when we read this story, we look at it as a kind of a horror story, and we are shocked and often filled with sorrow at what we read. This quiet, God-fearing, life-transforming man being led to a cross, hung as a common criminal, abused and cursed by the crowds and the soldiers alike. And yet, Pilate, who had seen and experienced the true controlled power of Jesus, puts up a sign. Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. He recognized the power and the authority of the Christ in that moment. Of course, there were objections. The chief priests demanded a change to the sign. "Change it so that he claimed to be King of the Jews," they shouted. But in verse 22, Pilate responds, "What I have written, I have written." There will be no change. An acknowledgement of what was happening. This was no criminal being hung as he deserved, being humiliated in front of the crowds baying for his blood. But this was the power of God being released. Our third reading from John's Gospel again continues from where we left. John chapter 19, verse 28. Later, knowing that all was now completed, and so that Scripture would be fulfilled, Jesus said, "I am thirsty." A jar of wine vinegar was there, so they soaked a sponge in it, and they put the sponge on the stalk of a hyssop plant and lifted it to Jesus' lips. When he had received a drink, Jesus said, "It is finished." And with that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. As we've reflected on John's Gospel, we have seen the power claimed by Jesus as he approached the cross. As he hung upon the cross, we're seeing the power of Jesus being released. And now in these couple of verses we've just read, we truly see the power of God confirmed to the world. Jesus, having just taken a slight drink, declares to all the world around him that it is finished. The job is done. The mission is completed. Mankind is redeemed. The salvation of God has come into the world.
When I survey the wondrous cross on which the Prince of Glory died, my richest gain I count but loss, and poor content on all my pride. Forbid it, Lord, that I should boast, save in the death of Christ my Lord. All the vain things that charm me most, I sacrifice them to his blood. See, from his head, his hands, his feet, sorrow and love flow mingled down. Did e'er such love and sorrow meet, or thorns compose so rich a crown? Were the whole realm of nature mine, that were at all my own. Demands my soul, my life, my own.
Our final reading on this Good Friday comes from the Old Testament prophet of Isaiah. Isaiah spoke so often about the coming of the Redeemer, the coming of salvation into the world, God's servant coming in ways unexpected to win salvation. We turn to Isaiah 53 and we begin to read at verse 2. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows, familiar with suffering. Like one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. But surely he took up our infirmities. He carried our sorrows. We considered him stricken by God, smitten by him, afflicted by him. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. How do we respond to such amazing love? Jesus on that cross, bringing salvation into the world, and yet Isaiah prophesied some 700 years before, through his wounds we would be healed. As we stand here today, we confess that through his wounds we are healed. We are saved. We are redeemed. We are forgiven because of the wonderful act of love of Jesus on the cross. How do we respond to that? What was the true effect of Jesus claiming and releasing and confirming his power and authority over all things, if we merely respond with a sense of emotion and sadness that Jesus died? Oh, how much more appropriate that we respond with an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Through his wounds we are healed. We should come rejoicing in the presence of God, thanking him for our salvation, and through our gratitude for all that he has done, once again offer our lives back to him, offering our love back to God, and offering ourselves in service to this God who loves us so much. And when we do that, we realize that all the power and all the authority of Jesus is passed on to us, that we might be his children at work in the world today, offering his love, offering his forgiveness, working in his compassion to minister to all people everywhere. So I pray this Good Friday that we might come before God, offering self in service, rejoicing at the wonderful depths of his love that we have experienced ourselves. May God bless you.
Out of the fullness of his grace, he has blessed us all, giving us one blessing after another. God gave the law through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ.
He could have left the cross that day to feed the hungry who were there. He could have wiped the children's tears away to show them he still cared. He could have once again reached out his hand to give sight to the blind. He could have kissed his mother one more time, but he had to hold to Calvary to ever hold to me. He could not free himself and set me free. He had to surrender to win my victory. He could not save himself and save me. He could have proven to Jerusalem that he truly was God's son. He could have shown those who scorned him that he was the mighty one. He could have grieved the crowd and filled the sky with angels to say